From the Outreach Building on the University Park campus of Penn State University, this is Race for the Fifth with moderator Patty Satalia.
Good evening and welcome to Race for the Fifth, WPSU's live debate between the candidates running for Pennsylvania's 5th Congressional District. During tonight's debate, which is being simulcast on WPSU TV and FM, as well as WQLN TV in Erie, we'll find out where the candidates stand on the issues that matter to you. We'll ask them to respond to questions from a range of sources, including the Centre County League of Women Voters, viewers and listeners from across the 5th District, WPSU's debate staff, and from the candidates themselves, both of whom submitted one question for their opponent. In the interest of fairness, each candidate will be asked to answer his or her own question. We've prioritized our questions based on national and state polls. Now I'm pleased to introduce the candidates. Republican Glenn Thompson is seeking a 4th term in Congress representing Pennsylvania's 5th Congressional District. His Democratic challenger, Kerith Strano Taylor, is an attorney with the Taylor Law Firm and the president of the Brookville Area School Board. Welcome to both of you. Here are the rules for tonight's debate. Each candidate will have an opportunity to answer every question. We strongly encourage candidates to challenge one another once both candidates have had an opportunity to answer the question, especially if they disagree with any factual information or feel further clarification is necessary. Candidates' answers will not be timed, but I will try to keep us moving along so that we can get to as many questions as possible. At the end of the debate, each candidate will have 1 minute for a closing statement. As decided by a coin toss earlier tonight, Congressman Thompson will answer the first question, which is, according to numerous recent polls conducted by CBS News, CNN, NBC News, and Quinnipiac University, among others, job creation / the economy is seen as the single most important issue facing the nation. And that brings us to this question, which was submitted to us by Mark Higgins of State College. What policies do you support to improve new business formation and entrepreneurship in the 5th District?
Well, thank you, Patty, for moderating, and thank you to Penn State for this event. You know, jobs, I couldn't agree more, and as I travel around the 5th District of Pennsylvania, the #1 issue is jobs, and always has been. Jobs are the solution to so many problems that individuals face, and quite frankly, I don't know of too many social problems, social ills that can't be solved with a good-paying job. That's something I worked hard at leading for jobs to bring to Pennsylvania, starting with Pennsylvania's #1 industry, which is agriculture. 1 out of every 7 Pennsylvanians owe their job directly or indirectly to agriculture. We wrote a farm bill. I helped to write a great deal of that, actually, and it's been seen as a very good thing for jobs here in Pennsylvania. Also, you know, looking at issues related to working on things like tax reform that, quite frankly, we have a very complex tax code, overly complex. And in fact, if you're wealthy enough and you can afford an army of attorneys, you know, you can avoid paying taxes legally. Well, that's not right, that's not fair. And it also holds back those entrepreneurs who really have a dream, they have a vision, they know what they want to do, but unfortunately it seems like government is standing in the way of them taking that risk. I know I grew up in a small family sporting goods business, and I don't think my parents could start that business today because of all the layers of well, some ineffective, inefficient regulations, the tax code, all those things that get in the way. Those are things I work at each and every day.
Candidate Taylor, same question. How would you improve the jobs picture in the 5th District?
Firstly, we have to learn how to say yes when opportunity comes to us. In Brookville, we had an opportunity to have a Keystone's enterprise zone come in. And typically we say no to things like this, right? Everybody's very worried about the taxes that you'll lose if you put through an abatement. And in our town, we looked at the numbers and realized that we could bring jobs, manufacturing jobs, if we made this parcel shovel ready. So it came to the school board first. They assumed we'd say no, and we said yes. And then it went to the commissioners, and they said yes. Then it went to the township, and they said yes. And now we're in the process of putting water underneath a highway so that we have shovel-ready spots for manufacturers to come in to employ our folks. In the 5th Congressional District, we suffer from underemployment more than unemployment. We have a lot of people working many part-time jobs to try to make ends meet, and yet we still have 115,000 people falling below the poverty line. So if we don't own the fact that the policies that we have been attempting in the last handful of years aren't working, Pennsylvania just dropped to 50th in job creation. 50th! There is no one right, doing worse than we are. This experiment needs to be over, and we need to find ways to get the folks in Pennsylvania's 5th Congressional District and across the Commonwealth back to work.
You can indicate to me, by the way, with a head nod if you have a rebuttal. And if I don't see that, I will move on to a next question.
Absolutely do.
You do? Okay.
I do. I mean, I'm not sure, Kerith, we're running for Congress, we're not running for a state-level position. I agree, and I applaud the folks from Brookville, from Jefferson County for the Keystone Enterprise. But that is a state program. That is not a federal program. Now, there was a federal program that was a part of that. Quite frankly, it was monies that came through some financing to be able to move those utilities underneath Interstate 80 over to the where the county fairgrounds are, where we're looking to develop that. And I was a part of that, of supporting that and making that happen. That really is the part of one of the roles of the federal government, is to work in partnership, in collaboration with state government and also with local government to create opportunities. And to create opportunities for those entrepreneurs. That is going to be a great industrial park. I think there's some folks with some great ideas. They're going to be able to move in here, find the utilities they need to create great businesses. And hopefully manufacturing, because that's what we really need to reclaim in Pennsylvania is manufacturing. We're still manufacturing a lot, but we have a tremendous opportunity today, given if we make sure we have the qualified and trained workforce and make sure we got affordable energy, the possibilities are just exciting.
This question comes to us from Susan Utes of State College. Americans are as disgruntled as ever with Congress and with both major parties. So our next question speaks to that. Given the current polarization in Congress, what specific actions will you take to achieve bipartisan approaches to moving Congress and the nation forward? And we begin with candidate Taylor.
I had an interesting question about 2 weeks ago. A fellow came up to me and asked me if I thought any Republicans had good ideas. And I said, yes. And he said, when they come up, will you vote for them? And I said, yes. And he said, that's going to make life really difficult for you in a caucus. And I said, yes, because it's about the work. I'm a negotiator. It's what I do. For the last 14 years, I've helped people negotiate from spaces that they never imagined they could agree and stand in a middle space about things that they could. Negotiating custody agreements with folks that don't have lawyers. Imagine the worst time in people's lives. I mean, they would not agree on what color the sky is. And 85% of the time, they walk out with an agreement, deciding on who's going to have Christmas and Easter so no one's pulling on their children's arms, right, which will destroy a family. So people often ask me, how are you going to do that? And I wish I could articulate how you negotiate. There's many components that are crucial, but listening to people and hearing them and echoing back what's important and getting to the space where you can agree, as opposed to standing in the space where we don't. I think if we turned on any news channel today, following politics in Washington, we would hear the word no repeated ad nauseum. That's all we hear now. No, and it's not my fault, it's the other side. And until we're willing to stand in a space in the middle and find something about which we can agree and move out, we're going to continue to have the exact same thing we have now.
Same question to you, candidate Thompson. What will you do to end the gridlock and partisanship in Washington?
Already a leader doing that. My recommendation, because I think you do, when you do watch mainstream TV, present company accepted for television, that's what you hear. You hear conflict because conflict sells. You hear no because that's what is elevated by the media. And quite frankly, I was one of the early members, founding members of something that's called the Problem Solvers Caucus. No labels. It's about 100 members of Congress. There's a handful of senators, but on the House side, it's pretty evenly split, Republicans and Democrats. We don't compromise our values. We don't compromise our principles. We come to the table. You have to be willing to come to the table. And we don't have to talk about what we disagree about, because frankly, we can turn on the TV and we see that every night. And I guess it sells commercials. But we have to be willing to come to the table and say what we disagree, that what we can agree upon, and make that the foundations for cost-effective solutions. And we've done that. We have done that. We've no labels has the very first piece of legislation was acted into law was called No Budget, No Pay. Kind of makes sense, doesn't it? If you can't do your job and pass a budget by the appointed time, which is in April, either the House or the Senate, you don't get a paycheck. No labels, in a bipartisan way, put that forward. And we ended the practice of the United States Senate of not passing a budget for 3 years. They actually passed a budget after that. And you go down through the pieces of legislation I've fought. There's not a bill I write that I don't do in a bipartisan way. I always reach out and find a Democrat to be able to help me champion that bill. Because why do I do that? Because if you can't pass a bill, if you can't do it in a bipartisan way, it's not going to pass, and it's certainly not going to last. It's something that will get repealed at some point.
And your chance, Candidate Taylor, for a rebuttal.
Thank you. I'm glad you mentioned no labels. You received an award from this organization in Bellefonte a handful of weeks ago, and the photograph was Republican, 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 Republican. To my knowledge, not a single Democrat, elected Democrat, was invited to that event.
They were all invited.
That's not the information that I received. Maybe the invitations got lost in the mail.
They were all invited.
So, you know, you could talk about bipartisan work, but the bills that are being pushed over to the Senate, I mean, how many of them were to overturn the ACA? Right? I mean, there are things that are happening. The Farm Bill was bipartisan, and I thank the congressman for that work. Yet it's a one step forward, two step back. The sequestration cut it by 7%. Right? So we have work that's being done, but it's being handicapped by other work that's being done.
This follow-up question comes from our partners, the Centre County League of Women Voters. What, in your opinion, is the reason for such strong partisanship in Congress?
Well, the partisanship really falls, most of it, I would have to say, there's partisanship in Congress, and a lot of it, based on my observation, is driven by the leadership, both parties. They're pretty much concerned with who's going to be in leadership in the next cycle, and will it be them. But I have to tell you, there's far more partisanship outside the Beltway, I believe, than inside the Beltway. Like I said, every bill that I work on is bipartisan, and it's just not true that that what we do is one-sided. There's 163 bills that passed the House of Representatives. The Democratic-led Senate passed them, and President Obama signed them into law. Many of those I helped author and contribute to. I'm proud of that. It's making a difference in people's lives. 387 bills are sitting on Harry Reid's desk. Of those, 219 were unanimous. Republicans and Democrats alike, yet they're sitting there. 161 of those bills were authored by my Democratic friends in Congress. And 98% of the bills that are sitting on Harry Reid's desk are bipartisan.
Candidate Taylor?
I went through the list. They named post offices. They declared days to be official days of something or so on. A whole slew of them are bills to attempt to overturn the Affordable Care Act, right, which has already been upheld by the Supreme Court. I would think we have more important work to be doing, right, on behalf of the American people than trying to beat this drum loudly. And it's interesting that you said you think folks are more partisan outside the Beltway than in. When I travel this district, I would say, anecdotally, even though there's data to back it up, 80% of the folks just don't care what party you are anymore. All they say is, it's broken, will you fix it? Because they're tired of listening to people bicker and point fingers and lay blame. I would agree with one thing that Congressman Thompson said, which is it's the leadership. And with all due respect to the folks that we have leading both houses, both parties, I'm not joining into that party. And I would hope that Congressman Thompson wouldn't either. Leadership has one job. One job. Their job is to move their parties to compromise. And we have demonstrated by the 4 people that are sitting in those spots that they haven't been able to do it together. So there comes a point at which, if we want our government to work, we have to say enough and start putting new people in.
You have just a couple of seconds for a rebuttal. Congressman Thompson?
Washington is broken. And if you come to Washington, I can take you right to the office where it is. It's on the Senate side, and in the top of the door, it says Majority Leader of the Senate, and that's Harry Reid, because he's the gatekeeper. He's the one that stopped 387 bills, 98% of them bipartisan, from going forward because he didn't want to put his senators in a tough vote. And some of them are very easy votes, like post offices and those types of things, but others are bills that are extremely important to the American people in terms of jobs, in terms of fiscal responsibility, in terms of energy security. That's playing politics with American lives.
Our next question. This past Thursday, the 4th case of Ebola was reported in the U.S. and the 2nd imported case. Health experts and scientists say the risk to Americans of contracting Ebola is, quote, vanishingly small. Nonetheless, surveys reveal that Americans are worried, and that brings us to Newkirk Johnson's question. He's from Warren, Pennsylvania, and he asks, do you support a full, immediate, and indefinite travel ban from all West African nations with Ebola outbreaks? Why or why not? And we begin with you, Congressman Thompson.
Well, I appreciate the question because it is paramount right now, and I share that concern. You know, I spent 28 years working in healthcare, in hospitals, serving individuals facing life-changing disease and disability. And on my free time, I volunteered as an EMT right here in Center County, responding to my neighbors' needs. And this is a serious problem, and I do support those travel bans. It's not 5 West African countries today. It is 6, because there's the 6th one just was added to the epidemic list. How many countries have to go into an epidemic with a disease that has a 70% fatality rate before this administration recognizes that we need to take better preparation, better response to essentially prevent what will become a pandemic? I think we've all seen those science fiction movies in the past, and it's dangerously close. So anyone who's traveling as a point of origin or through a West African country should not be able to come here for the time being. If they're flying, and we don't have any flights for those countries, so they have to fly Air Brussels or Air France. And if they're flying on a plane with 100 other people, I'm sorry, for a temporary inconvenience, for the incubation period, which is 21 days, I would say 24 days, if they haven't developed a fever by then they're welcome here. We want them to come and contribute to our economy, but the travel ban needs to be in place.
Candidate Taylor, should the U.S. implement travel restrictions on countries impacted by Ebola?
My concern is if we put in travel bans, people are going to try to be getting in through relatively porous borders, and then we're going to have no idea if they're here. And because we know of the fatality rate, this is a serious issue. But I suspect that the reason the American people are so worried is because they don't have much confidence in our government to be able to handle it. When we look at how much, they did a survey of nurses, over 85% of them have no idea how to treat Ebola. They've never been trained. 76% of them don't have the proper gear, right? Are they going to bring it from home? Glasses, impermeable clothes, yet the sequestration cut the NIH budget. It cut the CDC budget. It cut the emergency preparedness budget that hospitals across the nation use to transmit information about illnesses and disease like this. We don't have a Surgeon General. Our government cannot seem to function to cover the American people's needs. So while we have to be cognizant of this, we have to remember the first case was a man who came to the hospital, told them where he'd been, and was sent home. Our first line of defense are our folks that work in healthcare, and we're not giving them the information they need. So let's start there, and also watch what's going on in Chris Christie just let the woman that was living in a tent go home, right? So these travel bans and quarantines are being dealt with very differently state to state.
You have a couple of seconds for a rebuttal.
Well, I think when it comes to confidence, I agree. I have a lack of confidence in Washington. That is specifically an executive branch, administrative function, and it's the Centers for Disease Control. And this director of CDC has failed. I mean, we have been preparing for this type of a disease outbreak for decades. I've been out of the healthcare practice. I've practiced rural healthcare for a long time, and it's been 6 years. During my career, we were always looking at putting together plans in the event that this type of pandemic, epidemic disease would occur. It has occurred in the past, during human history, would occur again. I have to say the cost cuts to NIH and specifically to these preventive epidemic diseases, that's just not true. That is not true. We have robustly funded those every year. And in fact, there was this past year, numerous times we increased the amount of funding because we recognized what a potential threat this was back then.
Our next question is also a healthcare question. We begin with candidate Taylor. Obamacare has been criticized by both parties. If Obamacare is not the answer to our nation's healthcare crisis, please be specific as to your plans to fix the problem, since we all agree the previous system did not work either, and that was submitted by a member of our studio audience.
The Affordable Care Act is not perfect. I don't think anybody would pretend that it is, but we have to remember where we were in this space before it became law. If we asked the folks all the way over to the left, they would have asked for a single-payer system. And if we asked the folks all the way to the right, they would have said, leave it alone. So guess what? We ended up with something in the middle. That's the nature of negotiation. Now, in all fairness, that bill was not negotiated hard, right? The Democrats had the votes to get it through, and the bill needs to be amended, right? If you look at where the subsidies come into place, on the low end, if you earn below $12,400, I believe offhand, you're not deemed working poor enough to get help with your health insurance. You go on an exchange, it's $500. If you earn $500 more, it'd be $57 or $70, right? We didn't pay attention. Now, the Medicare expansion would have taken care of those folks that were deemed not working poor enough, but in our Commonwealth, we didn't take it. So we have people that still don't have access. There are 300,000 Pennsylvanians today that now have access to affordable health insurance that didn't before. So this idea of repeal, the idea that we would take away no-cost mammograms from women and put them back to a place where they had to pay $170 because it's a diagnostic test is not tenable to me. So the repeal is a horrific idea, and I wish we'd stop spending our money trying to get there.
Glenn Thompson.
Well, I've worked hard to both replace and then repeal, and also to fix serious flaws. You know, and of all the times I voted to do that, 16 times, the Democrat-led Senate, that was a part of this 200 or 163 bills we actually got done, agreed with me, and President Obama agreed with me. The Affordable Care Act was not negotiated. I mean, I was excited we were going to talk about health care when I went to, after working in health care and making such a difference in people's lives. And the fact is, to be locked out of the room, to only have a small handful of people that actually wrote this thing, that's why it's flawed, because not everybody was welcome to the table. So, but the question was, what would I do instead? Well, you know what? 6 months, at least 6 months before the Affordable Care Act was announced, I was a co-sponsor of a bill putting patients first. That actually, in my professional opinion as a healthcare provider, would have lowered rates, increased access, preserved quality, and made sure that it was the patient, not the health insurance company or a bureaucrat or somebody from Washington making decisions about access. I've led on legislation to do that. The STEP Act expanded telemedicine significantly. It's part of why it was specifically targeted to our active duty military, reserve, and guard, our neighbors, but it has reduced the suicide rate because of increasing telemedicine, which provides cost-effective access, especially if you live in rural Pennsylvania. I support federally qualified health centers. These are wonderful models for getting care. My proposal supports pre-existing, making sure that people with pre-existing conditions get access, purchasing across state lines, and quite frankly, prevention. Medicare, long before the Affordable Care Act, was beginning to recognize that it is much better to prevent illness, it's much more affordable to prevent illness, and insurance companies were already on that track. That was not created by the Affordable Care Act.
We need to move. You have just a couple of seconds for a rebuttal.
Just quickly, the 54 times they tried to overturn the ACA, I do not recall another bill coming up to replace it. It was repeal, and we'll fix it. We'll give you something better. Well, I don't remember getting the something better. So I appreciate the sentiment, but we spent millions of dollars on an effort to take away from people something that they were using, and I hope we don't go there again.
This next question is from candidate Thompson. We ask both candidates to draft a question for their opponent, and they will each have a chance to answer their own question. This one from candidate Thompson. The EPA has proposed a new regulation concerning the Clean Water Act called the Waters of the United States. Do you support their actions, and what will the impact of this be? Candidate Taylor.
I do support their actions because this regulation is nothing new. It puts us back exactly where we were from 1973 until 2003. Specifically, this regulation does not regulate ditches. It does not regulate water standing in a puddle, as has been repeated many, many times. It doesn't regulate existing farms. It doesn't regulate fertilizer being used on existing farms. Yet, that's what we're told, and it's this effort to frighten people thinking that we can't abide. These are the rules that were in place from 73 till 03 when Bush pulled them back by executive order. So we talk about how disappointed we are that President Obama is using executive orders. They've been used the entire history of our country, and this is one that was used and we can fix to make sure that our water is clean, right? I think all of us enjoy clean water. So this is not an overreach, even though it's been sold that way. It's putting us back to where we were for 30 years.
Congressman Thompson, do you support the EPA's proposed new regulation called Waters of the United States, and what will the impact of it be?
Well, I support the Clean Water Act, and I support since 1972, pollution in navigable waters has been reduced dramatically, and that's a good thing. It's good for health, it's good for the environment, it's good for our communities. But I oppose this new unauthorized pending regulation by the EPA. And I work at the lead in my responsibilities on the Natural Resource Committee and on the Agriculture Committee. Specifically, I chair the subcommittee responsible for watersheds. It's within the jurisdiction of my leadership. And the Clean Water Act, it's just not true that we're going back to where it was, because where did it start? You know, the Clean Water Act, 1972, Section 101B, Act 33, it was set up on a federalist model, and I'm quoting from the Clean Water Act. It is the policy of Congress to recognize, preserve, and protect the primary responsibilities and rights of states to prevent, reduce, and eliminate pollution and to plan development and use of the land and water resources. Now, I don't stand alone on that. In fact, Kerith stands pretty much alone on that. 260 lawmakers, including Senator Bob Casey, have expressed concerns. The National Association of Counties, county commissioners are bipartisan by definition. You always have two of one and one of another. They oppose this. The National League of Cities, I want you to think about cities. Cities tend to be mostly Democrat, not all, but predominantly Democrat, and this is what's quoted from their site on this issue. Cities seeking additional time and scientific data prior to the proposed rule adoption. 2 Supreme Court rulings have affirmed that the federal government is limited to regulating navigable waters. And so I think that the consequences of this, there's not clarity on this. There's certainly not clarity for our farmers. Talk with the Pennsylvania Farm Bureau. They're opposed to it. And if a farmer messes up, if a farmer misinterprets what you say is easy and it's not, they're subject to fines of $37,500 a day.
You're almost at 2 minutes, and we are going to move for a few seconds, Candidate Taylor, of rebuttal.
I have a problem, with all due respect, Congressman, when you talk about states' rights, because I have a long list just off the top of my head of opportunities you've had to vote for bills that allowed states to determine what was right for them, and you voted no. We had Congressman Cartwright proposed a bill to allow states to put in more strict mountaintop mining regulations, right? It's not a guarantee a state would, but to allow them to do so, and you voted no. There are states that want to regulate whether they have to label genetically modified foods, right? Some states already are, and you voted for a bill that prohibited states from having such regulations. So we talk about states' rights, and then we have votes that fly directly in the face of that position.
Speaking of states, to date, 23 states and the District of Columbia have minimum wages higher than the federal minimum. So this question, President Obama's efforts to raise the federal minimum wage from $7.25 per hour to $10.10 went nowhere, but some states are taking action on their own. The federal minimum wage has not been raised in 5 years. Congressman Thompson, should it be? Why or why not?
People struggling to make ends meet, they need a practical solution, not a political solution. It is the right of the states to raise minimum wage, and we're not here to debate that. This is about the federal government. Now, I would support a federal increase in minimum wage if it truly lifted people out of to greater opportunity. Minimum wage does not work for all people at the lower end of the wage scale. Now, why would we want anyone who's a sole provider for a family to earn minimum wage? We want them to do better than that, don't we? Whenever you raise minimum wage, they're still making minimum wage. Roughly 7% of those wage earners that receive minimum wage are sole income family supporters. I think if you want a practical solution, the practical solution is where I've been providing leadership. It's lifting people out of poverty, lifting people to greater opportunity, and that's job training. In my leadership responsibilities, I've helped, I worked with a good friend of mine. He co-chairs the Congressional Career and Technical Education Caucus with me, Jim Langevin, a Democrat from Rhode Island. We achieved the first increase to career and technical education training in over a decade. That was monumental, especially in this time. The Workforce Opportunity Investment Act, it's going to improve here in Center County and all 16 counties in the 5th District how people have access and the quality of the job training. So we educate people for in-demand positions. And these positions are sitting out there. Almost every employer in many service industries have good-paying jobs. They can't find individuals they're qualified and trained to fill.
Candidate Taylor, the same question. Should the federal minimum wage be raised?
It should. It should. And as good as job training is, the women that I work with that are raising their families on, let's be clear, Jefferson County, some women earn 54 cents to $1. Right? They're raising families on half. They no longer have daycare at night to be able to go get job training. And they're working during the day to get money to take care of their families. The estimate, the CBO estimate was that we will raise 1 million people out of poverty by raising the minimum wage. And that eases the burden on our social safety net. The estimate is that we'll save $46 billion over a decade, because right now, guess who's paying for the social safety net? We are. 18% of food stamp dollars are earned and spent by Walmart employees. Think about that. Mega employers are employing their folks earning just below the poverty line so they qualify for every government benefit, food stamps, free and reduced lunch, housing assistance. And then Walmart makes a profit off of our government dollars. I can't find anyone that thinks that's the best way to go. So the first thing we should be doing is raising the minimum wage. It acts as an economic driver, and every state that's done it has seen economic growth, because when people have money in their pockets, they spend it. Now that's practical dollars in your pocket.
This next question, give a couple of seconds for rebuttal. No applause, please.
I agree with Kerith's numbers. It is estimated to be 1 million people that would be raised out of poverty, just barely out of poverty. Because you have to think about this. Every time that the minimum wage has been increased 3 times in the past 10 years. 9 out of those 10 years, the amount of the threshold to qualify for poverty has gone up. That means more people qualify for poverty. The rest of the story that you failed to share is that, yes, 1 million people, let's put it this way, 1 million families would be lifted out of poverty. 500,000, 500,000 families, same study, would lose their jobs. They would go to absolute poverty because they would lose what income they had. Why would we want solutions where we pick winners and losers when we can find solutions to make everybody winners? And I know it's thinking outside the box because, you know, it's different from what other folks have talked about in the past, but I really truly believe with the types of training programs we're putting forward and the opportunities today, there's 200,000 jobs sitting open and available in Pennsylvania right now that employers cannot find folks who are qualified and trained to do. That's a solution that's all winners, not losers and winners.
We're going to move on to our next question. This one comes from our audience, and we begin with candidate Taylor. If an immigration bill were to come to the floor of the House that included a new pathway to citizenship, how would you vote, and where would you be willing to compromise? This seems like it's probably more appropriate to begin with Congressman Thompson, but we'll begin with you on immigration.
Immigration is a thorny issue because there's so many competing factors we have to consider. So when we have an influx of immigrant labor coming in, what's the first thing that happens? It depresses our wages, right? Because there are more people that are available to do the work at less pay, which is hurting the American worker. So for us to not pay attention to this and actually own the problem and come up with a plan is letting an issue slip by. But the conversation should not only be amnesty, right? That seems to be where they get stuck. Some say yes to amnesty, some say no, and the conversation ends. The fact that we're not pushing for strong enforcement on employers having to verify that their employees have the right to work there is the first place we should look. But the U.S. Chamber of Commerce gave the most money to this election cycle, over $30 million. They don't really want that. So immigration, money in politics is affecting the conversation we're having about this very real issue. So I don't think amnesty is the solution. I don't think deportation of every single person is the solution, because a lot of those folks are adding to our economy. It's a middle space, but until the money in politics is solved, we're never going to be able to have an honest conversation about it, because the interests of businesses are being furthered through their contributions to candidates that then vote accordingly to their wishes.
Glenn Thompson?
You know, we were real close on some immigration bills. Not pathway to amnesty, but we were very close. And then we had 50,000 children coming unaccompanied across the southern border. And it created such a toxic situation that all hopes of passing this congressional cycle went away, unfortunately. I don't support a pathway to citizenship. I raised 3 sons. I learned early on that if I wanted bad behavior from them, all I had to do is reinforce more bad behavior. Quite frankly, Ronald Reagan did that. He was honest enough to call it an amnesty bill, and it was going to be the bill to end all illegal immigration. And you know what it did? It sent a message around the world that if you want to come in the back door, not the front door in America, you can do that, and we'll allow you and eventually make you a citizen. Some of the immigration bills I'm actually a co-sponsor of, and a strong supporter of others. One of them starts with fixing the legal immigration system, because people are waiting in line to come in the front door. And it is disrespectful that we have a process that's so cumbersome. Number two deals with our students here at Penn State. We give education visas, and we give a world-class education at Penn State. And then what do we do as soon as their education visa expires? We tell them to go home so they can create jobs and kick our butts economically. Well, that's wrong. I believe in this bill, and this bill actually was supported by our local chamber here. They helped me work on it. Essentially, it would reallocate the visas that we issue now based on political correctness so that these folks, if they could create a new technology, a new business, a new industry, and create jobs, we want them here. We don't want to send them home. And then just briefly, strengthening Border Patrol. And I'm proud to say there's more Border Patrol agents today than any time in history, and we did that in a bipartisan way. And the last one had to do with agriculture, because without a workforce, we don't have food.
Okay, we'll have to leave it there. You have time for a brief rebuttal.
I don't know how we decide who we're sending home. The kid that went to high school, in an American high school, and graduated valedictorian is going to go to scholarship in Harvard, right? They don't have the college degree yet. Should we be deporting that dreamer, right? I don't know where the line is. So we have to, that's where the conversation needs to begin.
Okay, and this next question was submitted by Kerith Strano Taylor. It will be answered by both candidates, beginning with Representative Thompson. Quote, we both served on our local school boards because we believe that educating our children is one of the most important things we do as a society. To that end, each of us voted to raise local taxes to ensure our children had the programs they needed. I think we would both agree that the increases were minimal but necessary. Because of our shared commitment to quality education, can we agree not to use these very modest increases as a campaign issue?
Absolutely, and Kerith, you haven't heard me do that because I know how hard it is to make the decisions on school boards, because you're at the end of the line in terms of funding. Now, right now, when I look at the amount of money, which is more money than any governor at any time in the past that Governor Corbett has put into education. Now, I go back a couple governors. I actually served on the school board under Governor Casey, who essentially bankrupted the state of Pennsylvania and truly slashed, and there was no stimulus to backfill back then, slashed funding for our public education. And quite frankly, that's where I learned a lot about, unfortunately, when politics, I was used to politics coming before good policy, but it was at that point I learned how bad it can be when politics comes before kids. And so I would never use that as a political statement, because school board member, that's a tough job. You're making decisions that impact other people's kids, and they have your home phone number, and they're happy to call.
Can you answer that, your own question?
I appreciate your commitment to that, because it is difficult decisions to make, and I knew that we both had to do that, and I'm glad to know that that isn't going to be the issue. I do have to take issue. I still sit on my school board, and we're owed $2 million from the Commonwealth. $2 million. That's separate from block grant, that's separate from basic education funding. That's what we were committed to by the governor and have yet to be repaid. So our school district is not keen on the current climate when it comes to education spending. And I had to give a shout out to Brookville for that, because we're doing our best with limited resources.
Another education question here, this one, higher education is the single most important investment that Americans can make in their futures. Over the past 3 decades, the average tuition at a public 4-year college has more than tripled, while a family's income has barely budged. A college education is out of reach for too many low and middle income families. This question, we go first to Representative Thompson. What would you do to make higher education more accessible and affordable to more Americans?
Yeah, well, this is what I've already done. This is a record that's a public record. Number one, we finally reformed the student loan system. We tied student loan rates to prime. Now, we added prime 1 for guaranteed loans, prime 2 for non-guaranteed, and prime 3 for parent plus. That's largely because of the default rate that happens within student loans. We had to take that provision to protect the taxpayers. That's as important as making sure that higher education is affordable. I'm on the Education and Workforce Committee. I'm on the Higher Education Subcommittee. I have worked diligently to try to increase financial literacy so that people make good decisions when they're going for their degrees. We have a lot of people getting degrees and walking away with an average of $27,000 in debt and no pathway to a job. I also think that part of that is, as much as I love Penn State, I think there needs to be competition. And that means we need to promote different pathways to success in life. Career and technical education specifically. And there are good paying jobs that have limited debt. But if somebody is truly focused on going to college, I'm all in. I love my degree from Penn State and other universities, and I want to make that affordable. One of my things has been looking at what are the mandates that the federal government, unfunded mandates, puts on this university that drives up the cost of tuition. And there are many. And those are the types of things I've worked on and continue to look at.
Candidate Taylor.
Well, I'm thankful that the rates now are tied to prime, but my loans aren't, right? And there's a refinance bill that has been languishing in the Senate that can't get out that would allow students and former students to actually refinance their debt. But the reason that they can't right now is because a lot of that debt has been bundled up and sold into securities. It's being traded around Wall Street, just like with the mortgages. Right? Once this loan is bundled into a security and sold off, you cannot refinance. We have kids that cannot afford to pay their loans, risking default, right? And even if they go bankrupt, you can't discharge a federal loan, and nor should they. But for us to not have a conversation about really owning student loan refinancing is ignoring this huge weight that's bearing on our economy. We now have more student loan debt than credit card debt. Think about that. And you could discharge credit card debt, but you can't refinance your student loan debt if it's already been bundled. And we have to address it for the people that are graduating and trying to move on into their careers.
Real quick, I think you should be able to refinance, and especially today's market when interest rates are so low, and they're under 4% in many of our local banks, especially. And here's the problem, though. You know why you can't do that is because under the leadership of Nancy Pelosi, my first 2 years, they federalized all loans. You cannot go to the public sector and to be able to get student loans today, not without the kind of guarantees that you had before that would really get you favorable interest rates. So I encourage you, if you have kids that are in school, you know that. You know that that's the way the loan system works today, and it's unfortunate. You should be able to have access to all choices and options.
This next question, I got probably 10 different versions of this question. The Centre County League of Women Voters submitted a version. There were at least 8 from this group here, as well as a number that were emailed to us. This specific question comes to us from Candace Kent of Patton Township. It goes first to candidate Taylor. What are your beliefs about climate change, and how would you combat it?
Climate change is real. I mean, the irony that we're having this conversation standing at Penn State, right, where some of the leading experts are telling us that we have to pay attention to this. We are affecting our planet. And to pretend that we're not seems naive, right? The climate is changing more quickly in the last 100 years than it has over the history of the Earth. But what I have the most significant problem with is our military came to the House and the Senate 3 days before Memorial Day, and there were 3 hearings, and they asked for permission to study, to have some of their appropriations to study climate. And their argument was, you ask us to be ready for Hurricane Sandy, you ask us to be ready for forest fires, we need to know what's coming and study. And it was a resounding no. We're not even open to having the conversation about, let's study the change. It's either it's here or it's not. And I'm a graduate of Penn State as well. And one of the things they taught us was to ask a lot of questions. And if you don't have an answer that satisfies you, to keep asking questions. Our military came and asked a question, and they were told no. So if we want to be prepared, we need to embrace and ask the questions until we get answers that can help us get ahead of this, as opposed to waiting behind and being surprised with the result.
Congressman Thompson, what are your beliefs about climate change, and how would you combat it?
Climate change is absolutely happening. It always has throughout the course of human history. I really don't know if we've got good facts and figures to know if it's changing faster now. That's hard to say based on data 100 years ago. That there is some scientific methodology to do that, looking at tree rings, and I leave that for the experts to do. I have to tell you that we have to adapt. As a father and a grandfather, I'm pleased that the most recent study by the EPA, which is the National Greenhouse Gas Emissions Data, documented that U.S. emissions of greenhouse gases decreased by 3.4% from 2011 to 2012. I am thrilled as a grandfather, and my youngest grandson was just born a week ago. and Gabriel Noel Thompson. But I'm thrilled that greenhouse gas emissions in 2012 were 10% below the 2005 levels. We're doing the right things in terms of transportation, in terms of technology, and innovation, and we need to continue to do that. But our efforts, I think, should be twofold, and one is on adaptation. I was very proud to support a grant that went to the Department of Forestry here at Penn State that helped the researchers there look at the impact of climate change, and they don't know whether it's going to increase or whether we're going to get warmer or colder, but the impact of that on our hardwood trees. We got the best hardwoods in the world, and it's premium. And if that temperature goes a couple degrees one way or the other, we need to be asking ourselves, how does that impact that practice of silviculture? Now, I said there were twofold our efforts. The other one is we need to support research and development for cleaner technology that provides for a cleaner world. To me, that's straightforward.
And you have time for a rebuttal.
Well, I find it ironic that the study we did was to figure out how to help a business. We're studying the effect on hardwoods. Presumably they're for sale. But let's not study if it's about keeping our water clean, if it's not keeping our air clean, if it's not something for all of us. So if you can pay, apparently, then we could study and have the conversation to make sure it doesn't hurt your business. But if it's just about the greater good and making sure that our environment is cleaner than we found it, that's a conversation apparently we can't have.
Well, our Penn State foresters are going to be happy to hear that you're willing to pay them, our forestry students.
We're going to go to our next question. We have very little time left. Many say gridlock won't end until we change how districts are redrawn every decade. Redistricting in Pennsylvania is determined by the party in power, whether Republican or Democrat, and not by an independent commission as it's done in some other states. The result, say critics, is that politicians pick voters rather than the other way around. So this question beginning with Congressman Thompson, if re-elected, will you actively work to establish an independent, nonpartisan system for drawing legislative and congressional districts?
Well, that would require me resigning from Congress and running for and serving in Harrisburg, because that is states' rights. They determine how they redistrict. It always has been that way. And quite frankly, it's pretty equal which party has been in control in the past. You know, and there's a lot of misnomer that how fair these commissions are. You realize the question you have to ask yourself, these nonpartisan commissions, who gets to appoint them? Is it the League of Women Voters? I don't think so. Is it, you know, bottom line, it's the state legislatures who appoint. And when you look at some of the gerrymandering that I have seen among my colleagues, both Republicans and Democrats in states like California, the abuse there is amazing, and that is supposedly under the disguise of a nonprofit commission or a nonpartisan commission. Somebody needs to appoint those individuals to make decisions. I think that the way that we do it now, you know, the bottom line is if you're not satisfied in the House of Representatives in the state legislature, those folks run every 2 years. In the Pennsylvania Senate, they run every 4 years. That's where the checks and balances is with the voters. That's where the level of accountability comes in.
I can tell you who's absolutely not happy about it. It's the people that live in Erie County. Erie County got split in half. And they say to me when I travel is we feel like we were pawns in a game that someone else was playing. And they're right, right? How do you represent half of a county? And we have 5 in this congressional district, parts, you know, parcels of counties. So we should be having this conversation regardless of what level of government we're in, talking to people about how crucially important it is. The independent commissions do not place people in districts by party. Think about that. It's just by person. When we had the appeal here, a young woman came up with a computer model that divided up Pennsylvania by person. It kept townships intact. It kept counties intact when it could. It was brilliant. The districts wouldn't look anything like they do now, but they shouldn't. So I fully support us getting there, but more important than the gerrymandering is the money in politics. If we really want to get our government back to doing the work for us, we need to stop the money flowing into the coffers of both sides. With all due respect, they're both at fault, and we've created a system that invites corruption, and until we fix it, again, we're going to continue to have what we have.
You have time for a rebuttal.
Well, let me just say that I'm not sure you're talking with everybody in Erie County. You know, Erie County today, Erie County only ever had 1 vote in Congress. Today they have 2. They only had representation of 2 to 3 committees. Today they have 4 to 6 representation. Subcommittees, you double that. the counties I find that are in a position to have more than one member of Congress, they really like that. Lycoming County was an area my first 4 years that I represented, and I have to tell you, they were upset when redistricting took me out of there and left just one member of Congress because their influence in Congress as a county decreased in half. Yeah, power, money in Washington, you know, that is something that, you know, it is incredibly, can be an incredibly big problem. I'm pleased back in the 90s, though, with the campaign finance reform, that the limitations that were put on donations, unlike the state, which is an unlimited donation, you know, an individual is limited to $2,500 in an election cycle because of campaign finance.
Yeah, our next question will speak to that. The Centre County League of Women Voters and a voter from McKean County both sent us questions regarding campaign finance reform. One of the biggest barriers to running for office is money. According to vital statistics on Congress, it took on average $1.6 million to win a House seat in 2012. Where are you in the money game? Who are the top contributors to your campaign? And what, if any, campaign finance reform measures, candidate Taylor, would you support if you were elected?
So 95% of the money that has been contributed to me to do this has come from folks giving me under $200. $5, $10. I hope this helps. Go fix it, right? Congressman Thompson, the majority of his money has come over $200 and from PACs. I think $1.5 million over 6 years has come from PACs and corporate interests. So, you know, the game is that you need to raise money to reach voters, right? And we're playing the game just like everyone else, but it's fundamentally broken when money can buy seats. So personally, public financing is what allows the American people to take back their government and not have the determination of policy be drafted by the folks that are paying the money.
Congressman Thompson.
You know, I'm very proud that I've always had a very high percentage of contributors from Pennsylvania, and today it's 81% of the contributions that are made. My staff tell me come from inside Pennsylvania, and I think that's the way it should be. Now, who are these big greedy corporate contributors that, Kerith, that you know that all have lobbyists? I guess. Well, one of them's the Pennsylvania State Education Association. They endorse me. They contribute to my campaign. Why? Because I'm a leader on educational issues. The National Education Association, they endorse me because I'm a leader on education issues. When it comes to health care, numerous health care organizations, because I brought to Washington, and I have today, a background in health care that makes me an effective problem solver. You know, I'm the only piece of legislation really dealing with a crisis in this country, which is access to care for those folks facing mental illness, really came out of my Service Member Telemedicine Electronic Health Portability Act. So you earn support. I'm never going to be embarrassed for earning support. And I'm thankful and I'm humbled when folks support me, but it's based on my performance. And does it buy influence? No. That's the beauty of what was put in place back in the 90s. The contributions, the max contributions that you can make are so low, and there is a cost to advertising. That's why I'm so thankful for Penn State and WPSU for doing this, because we didn't have to pay a large amount of dollars. We didn't have to pay any amount of dollars, let's be clear about that, for this 1 hour of helping people make informed decisions and communicating with them.
Candidate Taylor, you have time for a brief rebuttal.
Citizens United Supreme Court case, right, made money unlimited that you could spend in campaigns. You can't spend it on my campaign, but you could spend an unlimited amount of money against my opponent, right? The SWIFT vote, Veterans for Truth, we saw this happen. Citizens United made it legitimate, the law of the land. We had a case that followed up that made it allowed to be anonymous. And you talk about how health care has earned your support. Did they earn your support with the 54 votes to overturn the Affordable Care Act, right? Let's connect the dots here. How did they earn how did you earn their support? So healthcare industry is making the most money off of the Affordable Care Act. If we're really going to own who came out just fine, it's the healthcare industry. So
that would be our hospitals or nursing homes.
Sure.
And we are running out of time. There is time now to go to our first closing statement, as determined earlier by the toss of a coin. That goes to candidate Taylor.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone at WPSU, Patty, for hosting this evening and for ensuring this is broadcast all the way to Erie so that the voters across the entire district have the opportunity to hear our different visions of how Washington should work for us. I feel fortunate to have taken this journey with Congressman Thompson. Unfortunately, our government has ceased to function as it could. Citizens United opened the floodgates for special interests to dictate our policy and corporate money to buy our legislation. Our Congress has been bought. Do you believe our representatives in Washington love our country more than they hate the other party? I love my country more than I hate just about anything, and I know that each of you watching tonight do too. Isn't it about time that we start sending people to Congress who will do the work for us? On November 4th, I ask you to take part in your democracy and vote. Cast your vote for me, and together we can begin to get Congress back to work for all of us. Thank you.
Congressman Thompson. Let's let the Congressman do his closing statement.
Patty, thank you. And thank you to WPSU and my alma mater for hosting this event. You know, 2 years ago, at this forum, I talked of a woman I had recently met filling her car with gas. Her words and expression reflected desperation as she pumped gas into her car. I was pretty sure she probably could not afford. 2 years later, my leadership working for her and you in Congress has served to ease burdens for her family and yours. Greater job training access through the Workforce Opportunity and Innovation Act that I helped write. Greater job access through the Farm Bill, increasing jobs in Pennsylvania's #1 industry. Again, a law that I helped write. Better prices at the pump with expanded production of domestic energy. Lower taxes for 98% of Americans and less debt with reduced federal spending 2 years in a row, first time in 50 years. Now, I look forward to continuing this fight for her family and for yours. I'm Congressman G.T. Thompson. My record is proven as a lawmaker, problem solver, and leader, and I ask your vote for Congress. Thank you.
And we are out of time. Thank you for watching. I'm Patty Satalia. For all of us here at WPSU, have a great night.